I still remember the last thing I ever heard before the silence took hold. It was the rattle of a nurse's bracelet as she leaned over my hospital bed. Her lips moved, but no sound followed. For 4 years after that, I lived in a world without voices, no birdsong, no music, not even the hum of my own breath, just silence, so thick it pressed on my chest like grief. And when my hearing finally returned, I didn't tell a soul I wanted to know what my son would say when he thought I still couldn't hear. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from. Down in the comments. And if you've ever had to stay quiet, just to find out who really stood by you, hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. My name is Violet Pryor. I'm 67 years old, and until a few years ago, my life was quiet in a very different way. Not silent, but calm. I was born in Montpelier, Vermont, raised by parents who believed in honesty, hard work, and showing up for family. Whether you felt like it or not, my father was a mechanic, my mother, a bookkeeper. They taught me to keep my feet on the ground and my word clean. By the time I turned 23, I had married Walter Pryor, a steady man with calloused hands who believed in routine and who never missed a Sunday dinner. We raised our only son, Brian, in a modest 2-story home on the edge of town. The house wasn't much by modern standards, but it was ours, paid off, built with the kind of care that made it feel like an extension of your bones. I worked as an accountant for over 40 years, first at a hardware distributor, then later from home. Once Walter retired, our life wasn't flashy, but it was enough. We budgeted well, ate dinner together every night, and put a little aside each month for Brian's college fund when Walter passed 2 years after retirement, a heart attack behind the wheel on his way home. The silence wasn't just emotional, it was physical. The house stopped echoing, the same way the quiet crept in and held on. The illness that took my hearing started like any other seasonal bug. It was early November, and I had a slight fever and a dull headache. Nothing serious. I drank herbal tea and figured it would pass, but within days, my ears rang with a sharp pitch, and my balance gave out. Brian insisted I see a doctor, and soon I was hospitalized. The infection had worsened, and by the time I woke up after a week on IV antibiotics, the silence had settled in for good. The doctors told me the medication had damaged my auditory nerve, a rare but known complication. And just like that, the world went quiet. I couldn't hear the sound of my own voice, or the way Lila giggled when she hugged my waist. Brian and Tricia tried at first, they really did. But they weren't built for patience. Brian works full-time as an insurance inspector, always on the road, and Tricia runs a dental clinic, juggling staff complaints and billing mishaps. They came by on Sundays at 11 sharp. Tricia would heat something up or reheat leftovers, and we'd sit mostly in silence. Brian would check in the windows and plumbing and leave by 3 saying Lila had lessons or practice or a birthday party to get to, but Lila made the visits bearable. She'd write me notes with little hearts above her eyes and fold them into shapes. She'd wait for me to read them. Never rushing, she never made me feel like a chore. Still, I knew what Brian and Tricia wouldn't say aloud. Their eyes said it all. Brian's impatience when I asked him to repeat something. The way Tricia sighed when she thought I wasn't looking. I read their lips, sure. But more than that, I read their gestures, the way people shift when they think you're not watching, after all that time. Deaf, I'd learned to hear what wasn't spoken when Brian started talking about me moving in with them. I could feel the undertone. He said it was for my safety, but his eyes said I was becoming a problem. I refused. I'd lived in that house for over 30 years, since before the neighborhood was considered valuable, since before the grocery store at the corner became a yoga studio. I told him I was managing fine, and it was true. I'd installed visual doorbells, used apps designed for the hearing impaired, and even joined a support group for deaf seniors online. But that wasn't enough for them, and deep down, I knew it wasn't concern. They were offering. It was control. One Sunday afternoon, after I'd spilled tea on the living room carpet, Tricia's expression cracked into something sharp and cold. Brian smoothed it over with a smile, but I saw through it, and in that moment, something shifted in me. A small, quiet part of me started to wonder if the people closest to me saw me as anything more than an obligation. Then in January, I read about an experimental treatment trial at the university hospital. Not a cure, but a chance. And without telling Brian, I signed up. What I didn't expect was that the world of sound would return so suddenly, and with it, the ability to know what had been said behind my back. But when I stepped out of that clinic holding my discharge papers, didn't rush to call anyone. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed in the house. I refused to give up and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old pipes, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I wondered not what I would hear next, but who I'd hear when they thought I was still deaf, and that Sunday they came at 11 as always. And that was when it all began. That Sunday, I heard the sound of their car pulling into the driveway for the first time in years. The slam of the doors, the shuffle of footsteps on the walkway. Then came the familiar chime of the doorbell, no longer just a flash of light, but a real, resonant tone. I took a deep breath, steadied my expression in the hallway mirror, and opened the door with the same careful smile I'd used every Sunday since losing my hearing. Lila rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me, pressing her cheek into my waist. I smoothed her hair gently and greeted her just loud enough to be heard, imitating the voice I'd once used when I couldn't hear myself. "Hi, sweetheart." Brian stood behind her, lifting a hand in a wave. "Hi, Mom," he said, carefully exaggerating the movement of his lips. Trisha followed, arms full of grocery bags, offering a polite smile. "Hope you're hungry," she said, looking directly at me so I could read her lips. I stepped aside to let them in, nodding as they moved past me into the kitchen. The same routine. Trisha set the bags down and began unpacking a store-bought rotisserie chicken and 2 side dishes. Brian flipped through the stack of mail on the counter, sorting it silently. Lila opened her notebook and began writing a message in her neat handwriting. "I got an A on my science report," she wrote. "Do you want to see it after lunch?" I gave her a warm smile and nodded. "Absolutely." While Trisha plated the food and Brian checked the thermostat, I stood quietly observing them. They moved with practiced efficiency, comfortable in my kitchen. I could hear the scrape of utensils, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the cabinet door that Walter never managed to fix. All of it so ordinary, and yet so different now. At the table, we took our usual seats, Brian and Trisha on one side, Lila and me on the other. That arrangement had been practical when I needed to see faces to understand anything. Now I recognized it as something else too. Distance. Brian spooned mashed potatoes onto his plate and asked slowly, "How was your class, Mom?" I nodded, replying just as deliberately, "It went well. I learned some new skills." He gave a brief smile, then turned back to his plate. Conversation stopped there. Just the sound of forks tapping and Lila humming softly to herself. While I helped Lila cut her chicken, I caught the tail end of a whisper from Trisha. "She looks tired." Brian's voice followed just as low. "That course of hers?" Why now I didn't look up? I didn't flinch. I kept cutting Lila's food and handed her the fork with a smile. After lunch, Lila showed me her science project, a cardboard volcano complete with red tissue paper lava. She beamed as she explained it, her hands animated, her voice full of joy. I listened, nodding in all the right places, occasionally pretending I couldn't make out a word, just to stay in character. Brian wandered upstairs for his usual tour, checking the bathroom for leaks and peering out of the guest room windows. Trisha stayed downstairs, rinsing plates and glancing at her watch. I wiped the table slowly, buying time, keeping busy. When I heard the screen door creak open, I turned and watched through the kitchen window. They stood by the old apple tree, Walter's tree. Brian lit a cigarette, one he supposedly gave up years ago, and Tricia twisted a strand of hair around her finger. "I talked to Griffith this week," Brian said. "The house is worth more than we thought. Close to 500,000, maybe more." Tricia straightened up. "That would cover the mortgage, Lila's school. Everything." Her voice was sharper, quicker. "I know," Brian said, exhaling smoke, "but Mom won't sell. She's still clinging to it like it's sacred." "It's just a house," Tricia replied, "and too big for one person, especially one in her condition." I gripped the counter edge, fingers going numb. They kept talking, their voices clear through the slightly open window. "I've already started researching assisted living," Brian continued. "Sunridge looks decent. It's 20 minutes away." "Can we even afford that?" Tricia asked. "Mom has a pension, savings, and if she sells the house, there's more than enough. And if she refuses—" Tricia's voice dropped lower. Brian didn't hesitate. "Then we go for guardianship. She's getting more dependent. Between her age and the deafness, it'll be easy to show she can't live alone." The watering can slipped from my hands and hit the tile with a metallic clang. Water splashed across the floor. I froze, heart thudding. Brian poked his head through the door. "Mom, you okay?" I nodded, reaching for a dish towel. My hands shook. He came in and took the towel from me, crouching down to mop the floor. Tricia stood nearby, arms folded, silent. "We should head out," Brian said after a few minutes. "Lila's got swim practice at 4. I nodded, unable to speak. Lila came over and hugged me tightly, her cheek warm against mine. "See you next week, Grandma," she said with a little wave as she stepped out the door. At the threshold, Brian turned to Tricia. "The house will be ours soon," he muttered, "and we'll get this burden into a nursing home." Something shifted in me. The silence inside snapped like dry wood under pressure. I stepped forward. "What did you just say?" Brian froze. Tricia turned, mouth parted in disbelief. Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Every word," I said. "Every single word, Brian." Their faces drained of color. Tricia's lips trembled, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. Brian stammered. "How, the treatment?" "It worked," I said. "I've been able to hear for a week now, and I heard enough today." Lila looked between us, confused. "Grandma, what's happening?" "Nothing, sweetheart." I kept my voice gentle. "Just some grown-up talk. Go wait in the car, okay?" She gave me a worried glance, then stepped outside. Brian turned toward me, hands raised. "Mom, please? You misunderstood." "Don't," I cut in. "Don't insult me with lies. You called me a burden. You made plans to take everything I own and lock me away like I don't exist." Tricia stepped in. "Violet, we were just exploring options. I wasn't included in those options." Brian took a step closer. "Yes, I said terrible things. I was frustrated. But I love you." I looked him in the eye. Love doesn't talk about guardianship behind someone's back. Love doesn't treat their mother like a problem to fix. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint ticking of the hallway clock. "What are you going to do?" Brian asked. I could see the panic in his face, not regret, not reflection, just fear. Fear of the plan falling apart. I didn't answer right away. I stepped back and straightened my shoulders. "Right now," I said quietly, "I want you to leave." "Mom?" He started. "Go. I'll reach out when I'm ready." "Not before." They hesitated, then turned toward the door. Tricia walked stiffly, her eyes darting away from mine. Brian glanced back once, lips pressed thin, but said nothing. I closed the door behind them. Through the window, I watched them cross the yard. Lila waved from the back seat. I lifted my hand and waved back. Then I sat in the nearest chair, hands trembling in my lap. The truth was out now. The mask had dropped. What came next would have to be carefully, quietly planned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of peppermint tea, watching the sky darken behind the branches of Walter's apple tree. Every sound in the house had come back to me over the past week: the soft drip of the bathroom faucet, the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the floorboards, but nothing felt quite as loud as the quiet between my thoughts. I replayed Brian's words over and over in my mind. The house will be ours soon. We'll get this burden into a nursing home. In the morning, I reached for my phone, the same one Brian had insisted on adding to his family plan when I first lost my hearing. "It's easier this way, Mom," he'd said. "We can keep track of everything for you." Back then, I hadn't questioned it. Now I turned the phone over in my hand and opened the settings. Hidden among the utility apps was a remote access program, something I'd never noticed before. It gave him full access. He could monitor my calls, messages, even see what apps I opened. I didn't delete it. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out Walter's old phone from the dresser in the guest room. I bought a new SIM card on my way home from the clinic last week, just in case. I turned it on, tested it, and made sure it worked. That would be the phone I'd use from now on. The next thing I checked was my laptop. Brian had helped me set it up when I lost my hearing. "Let me make it easier for you," he'd said as he adjusted the settings and installed a few programs. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now I searched through it with care. There it was, another remote access tool hidden in plain sight. Along with that, I found my bank login saved in the browser, along with a password manager that Brian must have installed. I didn't touch anything. I just shut the computer and slid it back under the desk. I brought Walter's old laptop out from the closet, reset it, and began using it for everything going forward. I set up new email accounts, new passwords, and started logging everything. I was going to take back control one step at a time. That afternoon, I went to the bank. I didn't make an appointment. I just walked in and asked to speak to the branch manager. His name was Mr. Collins. He blinked in surprise when I walked into his office alone. "Mrs. Pryor," he said, rising from his desk. "I'm used to seeing your son with you." I smiled politely and sat down. I thought I'd come on my own this time. He hesitated. "Of course. What can I help you with? I need a full printout of my account activity. All of it. Savings, checking, everything." He typed for a moment, then looked back at me. "Your son usually handles these requests. He has a power of attorney on file." "My hearing has returned," I told him, keeping my voice even. "I'd like to handle my finances myself from now on." It took nearly an hour to go through the statements. I sat in that chair and watched the totals climb. Month after month, small withdrawals from my savings, $500 here, $2,000 there. Nothing that would draw attention on its own, but over time, it added up to just under $30,000. When I asked for copies, he handed them over quietly. "Do you remember signing this power of attorney?" he asked, pulling a printed form from the file. It bore my signature, dated last year. I stared at it. I didn't remember signing anything of the sort. "I'd like to revoke it," I said, "immediately. And I'd like to withdraw $10,000 in cash." Mr. Collins hesitated again, then nodded. "We can do that." When I returned home, I went upstairs to the small office Brian sometimes used when he said he was helping with my bills. The drawers were still full of paper. I sifted through receipts, statements, post-it notes. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled Mom's Options. Inside were brochures for assisted living facilities, all of them within a short drive of Bedford. Some were circled with handwritten notes in the margins. Sunridge Manor had a red star next to it and a note, "Good balance of cost and reputation." Check insurance. But it was the second document that chilled me. a printed form partially filled out titled Application for Declaration of Incapacity. The handwriting was unmistakably Brian's. Patient shows signs of confusion, increasing dependency, not capable of managing finances, recommending full guardianship. The date line was blank. So was the signature line for the doctor. But everything else had been prepared. I took a deep breath and carried the folder to the kitchen. I copied every document, then tucked them into an old cookbook no one ever looked at. The originals I left exactly where I found them. The next few days were spent changing everything. I called Social Security my pension provider and every place where Brian might have inserted himself into my affairs. I updated my will. I created backups. I moved money into a new account under a different bank. I updated my address with the library, the pharmacy, the utility company, anywhere that had once automatically looped him in. Brian started calling by Wednesday. The messages were calm at first. "Mom, can we talk? I know you're upset." By Thursday, they'd grown more urgent. "I'm getting worried. If you don't call back, I'm coming over." That night, the message was shorter. "Talked to Dr. Kent. He says your behavior might be part of the adjustment period. Let us help." I turned the answering machine off. On Friday morning, my new phone rang. It wasn't a number I recognized, but I picked up. "Grandma?" It was Lila. Her voice was quiet. "It's me. I'm calling from my friend's phone." "Sweetheart, how did you get this number? I saw it on your desk last Sunday." I wrote it down, just in case. Her voice was steady, but her words were rushed. "Grandma? Is it true? Can you really hear again?" "Yes, honey," I said. "I can." There was a pause. "Daddy and Mom are acting weird. They whisper and stop talking when I walk in, and Daddy said you might not be thinking clearly." I waited a moment. "There's nothing wrong with me, Lila. Not with my head, and not with my heart." She let out a breath. "I knew it. Can I come see you?" I hesitated. "Do they know you're calling me no?" "I told Mom I was going to Lizzie's. I can take the bus to your house." I looked at the clock. Then I shook my head. "I don't want you lying, Lila, but I do want to see you. Let me call your mom and ask her the right way. Promise you'll call? I promise." After I hung up, I took another breath and dialed Trisha's number. When she answered, her voice was tight. "Violet, I want to see Lila tomorrow. Just her. For the day." There was a pause. "I don't think that's a good idea. If you refuse, I'll call Brian's employer. I have documents showing he's been taking money from my accounts without my knowledge." There was a long silence on the other end. Then she spoke. "I'll drop her off at 10. I'll pick her up at 6. "Thank you," I said. "And no tracking apps on her phone. I'll be checking." After she hung up, I sat in the quiet of the kitchen and stared out the window. I didn't like threatening them. I didn't like any of this, but I also knew I didn't have the luxury of waiting anymore. The truth was already out. What came next had to be done with care. Saturday morning, just after 10, Trisha's car pulled up to the curb. I watched from the front window as Lila jumped out before the engine had fully stopped, her backpack swinging off one shoulder. She waved, then ran toward the porch. Trisha didn't get out. She just gave a small wave from the driver's seat, then drove off without a word. Lila reached the top step and looked up at me with those big, expectant eyes. "You really can hear now?" she asked, breathless. I nodded and opened the door wider. "Every word, sweetheart." She stepped into the living room and looked around like it had changed. I wasn't sure what she expected, but when I closed the door behind us, she turned and wrapped her arms around me. "I'm glad," she said softly. We spent the morning in the kitchen, making blueberry pancakes her favorite. She talked the entire time about school, her art project, a new girl in her class who never stopped asking questions. I moved between the stove and the counter, listening to every word like it was music. It had been so long since I'd heard her chatter naturally without having to lean in and read her lips. After breakfast, we sat out on the back porch with a pitcher of lemonade and watched the breeze move through the tall grass by the fence line. She leaned back in the chair and turned toward me. "Grandma, what's going on with Daddy?" I stirred the ice in my glass and looked at her carefully. "What do you mean? He's been acting strange," she said. "He and Mom whisper when they think I'm not listening. And the other night, he said something about the house. About how you can't live here by yourself." I kept my tone even. "Your dad and I disagree on a few things. He thinks he knows what's best for me, and I think I can make my own decisions." Lila nodded. "That's what I figured." Then she paused. "So, you're not really sick or anything?" "No, honey," I said. "Not sick, not confused, just tired of being treated like I can't think for myself." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're the smartest person I know." We spent the afternoon walking to the park, stopping to admire flowers, and waving to a neighbor who was trimming hedges along the sidewalk. At the playground, Lila joined some kids from her school on the swings, while I sat on a bench nearby. The sounds around me felt sharper now, children yelling, a dog barking somewhere across the street, the soft grind of bicycle tires against pavement. When she returned to the bench, she was holding a melted ice cream cone and a napkin that barely helped. "If Daddy makes you leave this house, can I come with you?" I looked at her carefully. "No one's making me leave, Lila. But if that ever changed, I'd always make room for you." Back at home, she changed into a dry shirt and sat cross-legged on the couch. "Are you going to tell them everything you know?" "Eventually," I said. "But I'm still figuring out what to do. For now, it's important that you don't tell them about our conversations. Not even about today." She nodded quickly. "I can keep a secret." "Good," I said, "because I might need your help." That evening, after Trisha picked her up, I returned to the kitchen and opened the notebook I'd started earlier that week. I wrote down everything Lila had shared, then made a list of next steps. It was time to find out how far Brian and Trisha had gone. The next day, just before lunch, Lila called again from a friend's phone. "Grandma," she said in a low voice, "Daddy was on the phone with someone named Mr. Griffith. They were talking about the house, about finding a buyer fast." I jotted the name down on the notepad beside me. "Did he say anything else?" "He said something about meeting with Dr. Reeves, about getting a statement from him. That was the doctor who'd first diagnosed my hearing loss 4 years ago. If Brian planned to use his opinion to support a claim of incompetence, I needed to act quickly." "You've done great, honey," I said, "but I don't want you getting caught listening in. Be careful." "Okay," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know." After we hung up, I returned to my notes. I added Dr. Reeves's name to the list. I underlined it twice. That night, I sat on the back porch with a blanket and a pen light, flipping through everything I'd gathered. I reviewed copies of my bank statements, the forged power of attorney, the partially filled out application for guardianship. I grouped everything by type and labeled each envelope clearly. Then I tucked them away in the new safety deposit box key I'd picked up last week. I wasn't sure when I would need them, but I would be ready. On Monday morning, I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Elaine Bishop, and we'd met decades ago when our husbands worked together at the same tool manufacturing plant. She'd become a lawyer after her kids were grown and eventually specialized in elder law. I hadn't seen her since Walter passed. When she answered the phone, her voice was both surprised and warm. "Violet," she said, "I can't believe it. You're calling. I thought—" "I know," I said gently. "I've been quiet for a while, but I could really use your help. We agreed to meet at her home the next morning. After I hung up, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, listening to the clock tick on the wall. The weight of everything felt heavy, but the silence that once filled my life was no longer a prison. It was space. Space to think, to plan, to listen carefully before choosing my next move. QA. Any sentence. 35. Word no. Any new or misspelled name. No. Repeated idea from part U, X1. No. Elaine's front porch looked just the way I remembered, white railings, clean brick steps, a row of wind chimes clinking gently in the breeze. She met me at the door with open arms and that familiar sharp glint in her eyes. "Come in," she said. "Let's get to work." Her living room hadn't changed much either. Overstuffed armchairs, thick rugs, walls lined with books and framed degrees. I followed her to the kitchen table where she already had a yellow legal pad, a fresh pen, and a steaming pot of coffee waiting. I took the seat across from her and laid out my documents, copies of the forged power of attorney, the bank withdrawals, the application for guardianship in Brian's handwriting. Elaine listened as I told her everything. I didn't spare the details: the conversation I overheard by the apple tree, the files I'd found in the upstairs drawer, the money missing from my accounts. When I finished, she didn't say anything right away. She just tapped the side of her pen against the table and nodded slowly. "I'm glad you came to me," she said. "You've done more groundwork than most people in your position. And you've got something most don't prove." She reached for her phone and made a call to a colleague. "Lorraine, it's Elaine. I have a situation that fits your specialty. Financial abuse, forged POA, attempted guardianship, all by a family member. Can you meet us tomorrow morning?" A few minutes later it was arranged. 11 a.m. downtown. Lorraine Paxton, 62, retired judge turned elder rights attorney, now working in private practice. That afternoon, I stayed with Elaine as we organized everything into folders. She helped me write a list of next steps: new will, new medical power of attorney, a medical evaluation confirming my cognitive capacity, and a plan to transfer my home and savings into a legal trust. She explained everything carefully, never rushing, never speaking down to me. We worked until dinner time. When I stood to leave, she handed me a printed checklist and patted my arm. "We're going to do this right, Violet. You're not alone." The next morning, I dressed neatly and brought every document I had to Lorraine's office. The building was a quiet 2-story suite tucked beside a notary and a family clinic. Lorraine greeted us herself, tall, serious, with silver gray hair pulled into a low bun and a voice that didn't waver. She reviewed the power of attorney, first tilting her head slightly as she scanned my signature. "This is problematic," she said. "The date alone raises questions." When she got to the guardianship application, she shook her head. "This document, if filed, could have started a process that would strip you of every right to manage your own life." I didn't speak. I just watched her sort everything into a legal binder. After 2 hours, she looked up. "Here's what we'll do. First, a new will. Second, revoke every document your son has touched. Third, we set up a living trust, irrevocable, with an independent trustee. The home and your assets will move into that trust, and you'll remain the sole beneficiary while living." Elaine added, "And we'll have Dr. Keene, remember him from the university hospital, conduct a full evaluation. Written proof that your cognitive faculties are intact." Lorraine nodded. "With that, no court will take guardianship away from you. Even if your son tries, he won't succeed." I signed every document they placed in front of me. The new will removed Brian and Tricia entirely. Instead, it designated the bulk of my estate for Lila's education, with the rest allocated to a nonprofit for elderly victims of financial exploitation. I also named Elaine as my medical proxy. If anything happens to me, I said, she's the only one I trust. Afterward, Lorraine leaned back in her chair. "This doesn't have to go to court. But if they push again, you'll be ready. Later that day, I went to the bank and withdrew another $30,000 in cash. I moved it to a new safety deposit box under my maiden name. I also opened an account at a different bank entirely, one Brian had no connection to. By the end of the week, every dollar I controlled was out of his reach. Still, one thing wasn't settled, Lila. I didn't want her caught in the crossfire. She called again that Friday, whispering from behind a closed door. Grandma, Daddy, and Mom came home from work really upset. They were arguing in the kitchen. What were they saying? I asked. Something about how you're up to something, she said. Daddy said they need to act fast. I sat with the phone to my ear, listening to her breathe. Sweetheart, I said, whatever happens, just remember I'm okay. I'm safe. Are they trying to take your house again? They're trying, I answered. But they can't. Not anymore. Good, she said quietly. I want you to keep it. It's your house. I'm not going anywhere, I said. But I need you to be very careful. No more writing things down. Don't tell them anything about our calls. I understand, she said. I promise. After we hung up, I called Elaine and told her everything. They're changing tactics, I said. No more backdoor paperwork. Now it's friendly visits and concern. She didn't hesitate. Let them think they've still got control. It's better that way for now. That evening, just as the sun started to dip, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Brian and Tricia on the porch holding a bouquet of carnations and a bottle of wine. I stepped back, smoothed my blouse, and opened the door. Mom, Brian said, stepping forward with a smile, you look great. Come in, I replied, letting the door swing open. Let's talk. Brian and Tricia stepped into the living room with the kind of cautious smiles people wear when they're trying to hide an agenda. I led them to the couch while I stayed in the armchair across from them. A vase of carnations sat on the coffee table between us. The scent, once comforting, now felt misplaced. We just wanted to make sure you were okay, Brian said. You haven't been answering your phone. I've been busy, I said, getting caught up on things I missed over the years. Tricia gave a polite nod, smoothing her skirt. We brought your favorite wine, she added. I glanced at the label Chardonnay. Walter used to bring me Pinot Noir. They didn't know the difference, or maybe they never paid attention. Brian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We were hoping we could talk about what happened. I'm listening. He glanced at Tricia, then back to me. Look, I know we said some things last week, but you have to understand, we're just worried about you. It's a big house, and you're by yourself. I waited. Tricia spoke next. What we meant was, maybe a smaller place or a care facility with staff. You'd still have independence, but also help when you needed it. I reached for the edge of my teacup, letting the warmth settle into my hands. That's generous, I said evenly. But I've decided to sell the house. That changed everything. Brian blinked. You have? Yes, I said. I already found buyers, a young couple with 2 little boys. They're excited about the apple tree in the backyard. His lips parted, but nothing came out for a moment. Wait, when did this happen? Last week, I said. We signed the contract yesterday. Tricia shifted in her seat. Without talking to us. It's my house, I said. I didn't think I needed permission. Brian straightened his posture. We could have helped Mom. I've been talking to Griffith about options. I nodded slowly. Griffith. Yes, I remember that name. Their faces twitched just slightly. Brian tried to recover. Look, we're glad you're taking steps. Really, we just want to make sure you're set up comfortably. That's kind, I said. I've made arrangements. I'll be moving to Portland next month. Tricia blinked. Portland. Yes, I said. Elaine invited me. She has a guest room, and we've always gotten along. It's a good time for a change. Brian's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked stunned. What about Lila? She'll miss you. She knows, I said. And she's already planning to visit this summer. Trisha cleared her throat. When did you talk to her? I smiled faintly. Lila and I have been in touch. The conversation stalled. I stood and walked to the hallway. When I returned, I held a folder filled with neatly stacked papers. I placed it gently on the table. What's this? Brian asked, not reaching for it. Proof, I said. Bank records. Forged documents. The guardianship application. I found them in your desk upstairs. Trisha's eyes widened. Brian stiffened. You went through my things, I went through my house, I said. He shifted forward. Mom, you were planning to put me away, I said. To take my home, my savings, and write me off as incompetent. His voice cracked. That's not what we meant. You used my hearing loss as a cover, I continued, thinking I wouldn't know. But I did. He fell silent. Trisha finally spoke. We were overwhelmed. The bills, the mortgage, Lila's tuition. I held up a hand. I'm not here to debate your finances. I just want you to know that you won't be managing mine. I pulled out one more sheet, a medical report with Dr. Keene's signature. This confirms I'm of sound mind and fully capable of making my own decisions. Trisha stared at the page. You went to a doctor? Of course, I said. You were planning to use Dr. Reeves. I thought it only fair I have my own evaluation. Brian reached for the wine bottle, then set it back down without opening it. You've been preparing this. I have, I said, and I've taken legal steps. The house is already placed in a trust. My will has been updated. You're no longer heirs. Trisha opened her mouth but said nothing. I looked at Brian. You once told someone that this house would be yours soon, that I was a burden. I heard it, every word. He sank back into the couch. I stood. You should go. I have packing to finish. They stood slowly as if the floor had shifted beneath them. Brian hesitated at the door. Is there any chance we can fix this? I don't know, I said. But not today. Trisha stepped past him, holding her purse tightly. She didn't look back. I closed the door gently and turned the lock. The house fell silent again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. The days that followed were filled with a steady rhythm of boxes, quiet goodbyes, and paperwork. I kept to my schedule morning tea, packing a room at a time, and meeting with the notary one last time to finalize the transfer of the house into the trust. Lorraine had already filed the revised will and made sure everything was secured. My last appointment was with the moving company set for Monday at 9:00 a.m. I told Elaine I'd arrive by noon. Sunday afternoon, I walked slowly through each room. I paused by the bookshelf in the hallway where Walter's mystery novels still stood in order. I folded the last Afghan from the living room chair, the one Lila used when she curled up beside me during storms. Then I took the small photo of Walter from the nightstand and slipped it into my purse. I left everything else for the young couple who would soon call this place home. That evening, I sat on the back porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of peppermint tea. The sun had just slipped behind the tall trees, leaving a soft gold in the sky. I didn't expect visitors, but just before dark, I saw a familiar car pull up across the street. Brian stepped out first, then Trisha. They walked up the path, slowly hesitating by the front steps. I didn't get up. I waited until they reached the porch. We came to say goodbye, Brian said, his voice quieter than usual. I nodded, but said nothing. And to apologize, Trisha added. She looked down at the floorboards. For everything. I studied their faces. They looked different. Tired. Smaller somehow. We were wrong, Brian said. We let our problems get in the way. We used you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I stayed silent for a moment, then said, I accept your apology, but it doesn't change my decision. He nodded slowly. We understand. I stood and walked back inside, returning a minute later with an envelope. This is for Lila, I said. There's a letter inside, and a bus ticket for Portland open through the summer. Trisha looked surprised. Brian reached out and took it carefully. Thank you, he said. She'll be glad to hear from you. She deserves to know she's welcome, I said. No matter what happens between us. He nodded again. I'll make sure she gets it. I looked at him carefully. You're a good father, Brian. Don't ruin that relationship too. His eyes welled slightly, and he lowered his head. I won't. Trisha stepped back and gave a small wave. Safe travels, she said. Her voice cracked just a little. I nodded once more. Goodbye. They walked back to the car in silence. I didn't watch them drive away. I just stood in the doorway until the night air turned cool and still. The next morning, the moving truck arrived on time. I loaded 2 suitcases, 1 small box of photographs, and a worn leather bag with all my legal documents. The rest furniture books, linens I left behind. The new owners wanted a fully furnished home, and I no longer needed anything that wouldn't fit in the guest room at Elaine's. The drive to Portland took just under 3 hours. I watched the scenery change, rolling fields, then tall evergreens, then the soft gray skyline of the city in the distance. Elaine met me at the door with open arms. She wore a blue sweater I remembered from years ago, and her hair was pulled back in a neat clip. Welcome home, she said. I stepped inside the house, a warm 2-story place with polished wood floors and a long sunroom overlooking the backyard. My new room was upstairs, painted a soft green, with a wide window and a reading chair by the corner. That night, we sat on the veranda with glasses of iced tea, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It was quiet, just the soft hum of cars on a nearby road and the sound of wind in the trees. You know, Elaine said, sometimes the hardest part isn't what they do to you. It's what you have to give up to stop them. I nodded. I lost my home, my trust, my family in some ways. But you saved yourself, she said, and you made a path for Lila. I didn't say anything for a while. The quiet stretched between us like an old song. A week later, Lila arrived. She came off the bus with a bright red backpack and a sketchbook tucked under her arm. I met her on the sidewalk outside the terminal. She ran straight into my arms. I missed you, she said into my shoulder. I missed you too, I said, holding her close. We spent the first week exploring. Museums, parks, the Saturday market. Elaine taught her how to make pie crust from scratch, and I helped her build a new art project using scraps from the garden. She chattered the entire time, full of stories and questions. One afternoon, as we walked along the river trail, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think Daddy really understands what he did?" I thought for a moment. I think he's trying. She looked out over the water. He found your old picture the other day. He was holding it when I walked in. I think he misses you. Maybe, I said, but some things take time to heal. She nodded. I'm glad you didn't let him send you away. I'm glad too. She slipped her hand into mine and gave it a squeeze. We walked the rest of the way in silence. That evening I called Brian. Just a short conversation. He asked how Lila was, if she was settling in. I said she was. He didn't ask if I was coming back, and I didn't offer. After the call, I stood in the kitchen watching Lila and Elaine laugh over a batch of burned cookies. I thought about everything I'd left behind and everything I had now. The weight I'd carried for years had lifted, and in its place, something steadier had taken root. Spring turned into summer, and life in Elaine's house settled into something quiet and steady. Mornings started with coffee on the porch, a crossword puzzle between us and Lila curled up with her sketchbook at the kitchen table. I hadn't lived with someone else in years, but with Elaine, it never felt like I was intruding. She gave me space when I needed it, and company when I didn't know I needed it. Lila spent most weekends with us that season. She fit into the rhythm of the house like she'd always belonged, pulling weeds in the garden, helping Elaine bake lemon bread, asking me to test her spelling words while she brushed her hair. When August rolled around, she asked if she could stay one extra week before school started again. I said yes, without hesitation. The day before she left, we went for a walk by the river. She skipped rocks, counting the bounces out loud, and then grew quiet. "Grandma," she said, "do you think things will ever be the same again?" I looked out across the water. "I think things will be different," I told her. "But sometimes, different is just what we need." She nodded, and I could see she understood more than her age would suggest. That night, we packed her bag together, folding her clothes carefully and tucking her art supplies into the side pocket. I slipped a note into the front zipper, just a short message and a little money for her school fundraiser. Something small to remind her I was always thinking of her. The morning she left, Brian came to pick her up. He stayed in the car while she hugged us goodbye. As she climbed into the passenger seat, she looked back through the window and gave me a long wave. I raised my hand in return, holding her eyes for a few more seconds before the car turned the corner and disappeared. I stood on the porch a while after they left, the wind shifting the curtains behind me. Elaine stepped out and handed me a fresh cup of tea. Neither of us said anything. We just listened to the quiet together. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten in Brian's blocky print. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He said he was sorry for how he handled things, that he was working on being better for Lila, and maybe one day for me. He said he didn't expect anything in return, but he wanted me to know he was trying. I placed the letter in the small wooden box I kept on my dresser, alongside old photographs, pressed flowers from Walter's memorial, and now this simple apology. Some wounds don't heal with a single conversation or a signed document. But time, honesty, and distance can build something new, something quieter, maybe even stronger. I didn't lose everything. I left with my dignity, my independence, and the one person who saw me clearly all along. And in the end, that was more than enough. If you're still here listening, thank you for staying through my story. And if you've ever had to start over, whether by choice or by necessity, I hope you know it's never too late to protect what matters most.